And so a lot of what I might have to pass on today, I recognize, I can hear myself. It's going to sound idealistic, which might make it sound naive. I don't think either of those are true. They've been borne out by the research time and time again. But I do believe that if a change in policy, change in approach, change in pedagogy can help a student, that is worth it. So that's why I chose that starfish one in particular, because I love that story. I think it's true. So I want to talk about ungrading and AI. And they dovetail, I think, really, really beautifully together. Can I get this to work? Give me 1 second. No, that's how it worked earlier. Okay. All right. No worries. Well, maybe I need to be on the right one. That's probably it. Okay, there we go. Why are we here? There are across campus in different disciplines, different schools, people who might agree with Ken Brockman. I, for one, welcome our new AI overlords. That's not me. Just to be upfront, I am what you would probably label an AI skeptic, a heavy skeptic. I've read Ethan Mollick's book. A lot of people have read Co-Intelligence, which did actually give me a lot to think about. And so I will go as far to say, especially in writing studies, my policy is essentially no AI, and we'll talk about that later. But I also recognize the realistic side of me that there is very real pressure from the business world on some of our schools, from students upward on faculty, from voices in the culture that we have to reckon with AI. And though, like many people, I'm skeptical of the narrative that AI is inevitable. I know that it's out there and something we need to think about. And so as faculty and staff, as we're all wrestling with what AI and the new AI overlords are bringing to us, my thoughts about ungrading have again and again been coming to the fore. So we're here to sort of think about how do we live in this world that's at our doorstep, that's within our classrooms, and then not in our classrooms, it's in the classroom right before us or right after us, right? If a student is in CoGod class right before mine, they're in a class that's like AI all the time. And then they come to my class, I'm like, AI none of the time. And then they read an op-ed maybe, and it's like, you're coming to the business world, it's AI all the time. All right, and so they're getting all these different messages. What can we do in this environment for our students? Everything is for our students. That's my take. Okay. So here's what I have, like, it's a big picture for today, so you know what to kind of run through. One is just ungrading as a concept. For those who might be unfamiliar with it, you came because you want a little bit more about it. This will be the toeiest toe in the top of the deep water, skimming of the surface. But I do think there'll be enough to whet your appetite. And so if you're like, oh my God, that does sound amazing. You're right, it does. And that'll give you a sense if you want to keep going down this road. And then that will flow into the idea of the pedagogical challenges that generative AI raises. And then, of course, the sort of meat and potatoes. How can ungrading help or meet those or ameliorate those a little bit? So I chose the hammer and the nail thing very particularly. And here's why. There is that very old but very true cliche that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I know that, except sometimes they are nails if you're the hammer. So ungrading and AI really do work well together. Or I should say, ungrading really does help us in the pedagogical challenges. And so I just want you to be aware that I'm aware of my tendency to be an enthusiastic propagandist for ungrading, based on evidence that many people have done, that I do with my solo research, that I have seen since fall 2019 with my own students. I actually really do think that ungraded principles can help with a lot of the concerns that people have about AI. So some things are nails. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes it's a nail. Okay. So let's start with ungrading. A couple things about it that you can sort of look forward to and about. And please, at any time, there's a slide come up which is post this section, a place for questions about ungrading. We're a small but mighty band. Interrupt. Ask a question if you want. Whatever I can do to help. Okay. So I want to talk about some of the powerful traditional grading schemes that lead a lot of people to ungrade. And you might find if you haven't moved over to ungrading that you're like, yeah, that is a problem. I do hate that about traditional grading. Then I'm going to talk about some central tenets of ungrading. Ungrading is this big umbrella term. It's, it's like saying AI, right? Which is not a specific kind of AI. There's generative AI, there's artificial general intelligence, there's the AI in grammar, like there's all kinds of flavors. So ungrading is just the umbrella. In a sense, people who have moved away from the traditional A to F numerical grade is a subjective determination by the faculty member to the student. People who've moved from that fall typically under the umbrella of ungrading. So I think there are some central tenets that unite all those flavors. And then I'm going to give you just a sampling of some of the popular flavors of ungrading. Okay. So here are some problems with traditional grading that people have found over the years. Number one, grades independent of any feedback say nothing about what a student did or didn't do well. So if you get a C on a paper or a B on a paper, and that's all you get, and then someone says to you, oh, why'd you get the B? It literally doesn't tell you. It's just this grade that appears. It's a B, it was a C, it was an A. Why? I don't know, it was just there. So without feedback, a grade by itself says nothing. When you put it with feedback, the problem doesn't go away. One of the most important studies that was done was back in the mid to late 80s. And they had 3 cohorts of students. One set of students got only grades. One cohort got grades with feedback. The last cohort got only feedback. Only the third group showed transfer of learning and improvement. Because when you get the grade with feedback, even if you have a page of feedback, you read that feedback through the lens of the grade. Why did I get what I got? So the feedback is not about making me better, or it's not there for mere improvement. It's there as justification. And so a student reads that as justification, not as the sincere engagement with my work. The teacher just wants me to do better. So even having great feedback, if you have the grade there, it poisons it. It's a drop of poison in a bucket of good water. Just give them the water. Next, grades provide external motivation, not internal. Motivation studies is a huge part of ungrading, because if you, this was another famous study, I think early 2000s. There was a game that kids like to play. And so the kids would play it. You'd leave them in a room with the game and they would play it for quite a long time. If you rewarded them for how long they played, they would play until the time ran out that they needed to get the good grade, and then they wouldn't play with it anymore. Again and again, whatever you reward someone for, they will begin to do for the reward, not for the thing itself. Right? That's the external versus internal motivation. This, for me, is one of the most important things about ungrading. Our students have been well taught by, most of our students have been well taught by a terrible system. Do this thing, you will get this reward. Go on to the next hoop to jump through. In fact, I just saw that this TikTok. I don't mind being on TikTok. There's a college professor who was talking about motivation, and he said, "No, that's actually not a bad way to do high school. Like, here's the hoop, jump through the hoop onto the next hoop. But when you get to college, these kids find it's wide open. No one's telling me what to do. There are hoops everywhere, but no one is saying." Go to this club, go to this after school extracurricular, do this extra assignment. You have to have that motivation yourself. And so grades dampen the joy of education, because now they're doing research, they're doing exercises for the grade. That's it. And all they want is the grade. What we're trying to do in the ungrading movement is get back to that spark. On my board every day, if you've ever been across campus and there was a whiteboard with Y up in the left corner, that's like my tag. Every classroom I'm in, I put that in the top left corner as a reminder. That's where we used to be as kids. You used to just say Y about everything. And one day I was driving with my daughter, who's going to college on Tuesday. We're driving her down to Florida. And we're driving, she's looking out the window. She goes, "Why is the sun round?" What a question! Like, when do you walk through your life and just have this, "Oh, why is the sun round?" And I was like, I don't know, I guess because it's exploding in all directions. So then I called my mother-in-law, who's a physics professor. I was like, "How was that?" She's like, "Well, you're half right." It's exploding in all directions, and it's being pulled to the center in all directions. Well, I was like, oh, that's cool. So how do we get them back to Y? Grades will not do it. They will not get them back to Y. And also, grades are inconsistent from teacher to teacher, yes. But even within a teacher's pile, they have found that the students who are graded at the end of a stack do worse. Whether the teacher's more tired, more grumpy, more frustrated with the mistakes that the first people made, that they blame the last people for still making. And so it's an inconsistent, subjective tool that gives them the wrong motivation and doesn't help them learn.
And it sucks being at the end of an alphabet.
Yes, it does.
E.
Trogdon Temashasky. Yeah.
So I'm gonna sound a contrary note.
Perfect.
This may all be true. I will stipulate. The world, though, it's not world we work in this world.
Sure.
A world in which we have to report things to our departments or deans or agents. And what is then reported to potential employers is not this.
Yes and no.
Well, hold on.
Yeah,
And
sorry.
I've known people who have either gone through or have taught at Evergreen State. Okay, that does basically
Just feedback, yeah.
right. And it does not do wonderful things for the job prospects of the students who are coming in. Because regardless of whether or not it should be based on a letter grade or a numeric assessment, that's the way in which the rest of the world is working. So while I agree in part about this at some abstract level, there's also the practicalities of student departments, deans, university, required letter grades. Second, the expectations of employers afterwards is that as well. And whether or not they should be basing their decisions on these things that are arbitrary. If you're at the end of an alphabet, you're not in good shape because whoever's doing the grading is tired by the time they get there. It is, I just don't know that this necessarily fits with the world in which we're living.
Good. Let me make sure I hit as much as I can for responses. Those are great, by the way. Those are great concerns that come up a lot. Number one, is this the way the world works? Those of you that have to apply for, like I used to have to apply for my job every year until I got continuing appointment, right? Because I'm term faculty. I never got back from the RMP committee B, C, A.
No, but you did receive reviews based on your SATs with your numbers as to where you fell on a 5-point scale.
Sure,
So
but
it's not as if it was not as if you were going to be the equivalent would be submit the open answer and to questions solely and not the numerics.
But
then we will make a decision about it.
yes, SATs have been a problematic thorn in the side of people for years. They are a bigger thorn in the side of people who are almost everything I'm not. A cishet white guy who's able-bodied, right? We know SATs as a tool, sexist, ageist, ableist, racist, all of that. And so the argument that we should keep using a tool, admitting the flaws of it. Well, we don't have as much as flaws.
That's not what I'm saying.
Well, you're saying that we're judged by SATs, right?
No, I'm saying that we are judged by things that come with either numbers or their grades.
All right, but we're
Or-
here
or-
to hear about.
Actually,
No, I just want to make sure that I'm actually.
I would love to learn
Yeah.
how you do it, right?
And we'll keep going.
We may agree or disagree, that's on the basis.
Yeah.
I would love to learn how you do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
To just finish, can I just finish this point really quick, which is, yes, there have been problematic tools used to evaluate all of us, but they're admittedly problematic tools, which is why we're trying to change the systems around them. The argument that, let's forget about grading. Let's just say like, we know well to study. If you put a non-white sounding name on top of a resume, they are so much less to get an interview, right? Like, I don't think we'd be like, yeah, well, we know that the system's racist and we just have to put up with it. Like, you'd be like, we want to change it, right? So like, the other, but to your point, does the real world work this way? The real world works more like feedback than grades, right? And so when I get my merit evaluations or my reappointments in all days, SETs were considered, and over the years, since I've been here, they've become less and less and less. And we've included statements like in the complex problems faculty handbook. We have a statement included. We know this is a flawed tool, that it has all these things built into it. Second, in terms of students succeeding outside of class, schools that use this, their numbers of admission to grad school are on par, if not higher, than other schools. They're getting into grad schools, independent of this being a problem or whatever. Med schools, law schools, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, they are changing their first years of grad schools to go to ungrading because they recognize the value to their students of not living in this fraught system. So it may seem as if the world is inevitably going to be using this flawed tool. It's not the case. Like there are lots of places. Now there is still pressure for it, absolutely. But what we can do is lobby to get rid of those kind of pressures, which I'll talk about in a little bit, actually. Okay. To finish this up, this is from a very famous essay. Shinsky and Tanner's Teaching More by Grading Less or Differently. This is a nice summative slide. So that's why I wanted to have the language for you. And then if you want to get these slides later, you can sort of use them as breadcrumbs. Grades can dampen existing intrinsic motivation, give rise to extrinsic motivation, enhance fear of failure. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Reduce interest, decrease enjoyment in classwork, increase anxiety, hamper performance on follow-up tasks, stimulate avoidance of challenging tasks, and heighten competitiveness. This moment here about increasing anxiety. A few years ago, I gave a talk at a CTRL thing about ungrading more generally, which you can find online if you want it. And so you'll hear some of this. This is taken from that. But one of the things that was shocking is they asked teenagers, do you think your parents would rather you be kind or get good grades? 80% said the latter. It doesn't mean that parents actually thought that way, but what it tells you is the kids had imbibed that poison, and they thought that their parents believed more in the value of doing well academically than being a good person. And we've seen an attendant rise in mental health problems, as you all know. A lot of that is connected to the grading system that they live under. Okay, so here's some of the generalized central tenets. I actually added the slide in just yesterday. I picked up this book, What the Best College Teachers Do. Brad, I'm sure you've read this. I've been thinking of you. Brad Knight, you know Brad Knight. I don't know who knows more about pedagogy on this campus than Brad Knight. Honestly, I say it all the time. I'll say it publicly. He's read everything. He's got it all up there. He's brilliant. So I've been thinking of you. But this connects to what we're talking about. And so one of the things that Bain starts running through, he talked to dozens of teachers that had demonstrated excellence in teaching. And then he kind of pulled out some truths that seemed to be uniting them. Here are a couple. Number one, learn that or go into a classroom believing that knowledge is constructed, not received. This is rejecting the Freire banking model. That I put knowledge into you, you spit it back out, and you learn. Instead, they have to build it in their mind. You know, it's the difference of like I've got two teenage daughters and a 12-year-old who's basically a teenager. So I basically have 3 teenage daughters. They will learn things when they come to it. I can't just like tell them something and that's going to become embedded in them. They need to get to it. I can help them construct that knowledge. So how do we do that? How do we help our students, our kids construct knowledge, not get the banking model? And the thing about mental models, 3 things about mental models that students come in, whatever your discipline is, from chemistry to writing to history to sociology, whatever, and they actually have either really detailed or really rough mental models that they're going to make sense of. And so if you ask them about Israel-Palestine or abortion or the death penalty, they may not have thought deeply, what we call deeply about it, but they have some kind of model that they're going to apply to it. So when you want to help them learn, first thing you have to do is give them a situation where they have to bring this old, outdated, rudimentary model to bear, and they discover that it doesn't work, or the model is challenged, it falls apart, it doesn't hold cohesively. And then you have to make sure that they actually care that the model didn't work, right? Like, oh my God, so for instance, when I teach my complex problems class is the West problem of evil. And the first thing I ask them on day 1 to submit for the next class is 1 to 2 sentence. What's your definition of evil? And as you might imagine, it's typically, almost all of them are like intentionally hurting someone. And so I tend to use really dark, difficult examples. Like for instance, if I truly believe that the world degrades children and it corrupts you, and I don't want kids to go to hell because I believe that a corrupt individual goes to hell. Then what if I, out of this caring for their immortal soul, blow up a bus of children? I didn't want to harm them. In fact, I'm trying to protect their immortal soul. Did I do something evil? Why? Because I didn't intentionally harm them. In fact, I intentionally saved them. And so then they have to ask, like, well, that's not what I meant, and here's what I mean by harm, and here's what I mean by intention. I have free will week where I try and destroy the concept of free will. So intention becomes problematic. But they have to care that their model didn't work for everything, right? So it's like posing problems to them where they realize the limitations of their model. And then you have to make sure that you can help them have the ability to deal with that. For my class, I've had people who go back at Thanksgiving and talk to their families, and I had the student who came back, and when I started talking to her class, she started to sob because her family was so upset with the ideas that she was just floating at the Thanksgiving table. And I was like, Jesus, like what we do as teachers, when we actually challenge their mental models, we're challenging core beliefs in their lives if we're doing it right. So we have to be there to help them through that. So all of that for me becomes the therefore, as teachers, we need to build in what Bang talks about as expectation failures. Places where their expectations don't work. But if you do that, if you build in places where we know that failure helps learning, you need to build a grading system that allows for failure. And so this is why I say fail and learn, not fail and burn. That's a key takeaway of ungrading, right? We have to give space for students to be challenged and admit that they won't reach the challenge. But that's where learning can happen. So we have to build that into it. And this goes back to the early point about, the problem of the system. Grades matter. We give kids scholarships because of their grades, and they get to participate in sports, and they get to even be at the university because of the grading system. Like, we are premised on poisonous pillars. Absolutely. I take your point really well. So how do we work within that system? So here are some central tenets that come out, I think span all the ungrading frames. If grades inhibit learning by relying on external motivation, we need to somehow focus on their internal motivation. How do we do that? How do you get kids to want to do the thing that you are asking them to do because you believe in that? If we know that grades inhibit learning by preventing the authentic relationship between us, relationships in teaching are huge. How do you get that? We need to focus on sincere relationships, mutual earned trust. I found that one of the number one objections I get from across the university to the ideas of ungrading is, aren't the kids going to use it? They're just going to get away with it. It's this fundamental distrust of students, which if you look at a syllabus, like my syllabus used to be so legalese of a kid did this one time, so this is what you can't do. Oh, and then a kid did it one time, right? It's like you build a syllabus on, I'm going to stop it from happening again. Ungrading, I would argue, and all ungraders I'd love to hear across the board, it's a fundamental paradigm shift. What if you start from trusting students and believing? This is what I've come to believe. In the old days, I mean, this is the thing. If you looked at like my professors, my students love to tell me about, God, I used to be a real dick, right? I had this belief that I was the professor, tough as nails with a heart of gold, and I'll hold you to the fire, and that's so great. And an A is impossible to get, and isn't that's so wonderful? I look back and I cringe about that. That's not a place of mutual trust and respect, right? That me really buying into the, I have something that I want you to imbibe, spit it back to me right, and you'll get there. And it's so hard to go and want what I want you to do. When you move to ungrading, the relationship fundamentally changes. It's so much more authentic. And I think it's what most people who become teachers want. We don't want to police you. I don't want to tell a kid if they can go to the bathroom or not. I don't want to tell them if an absence is okay or not. And we talk about my absence policy. That's kind of a tangential thing, but I think it's all part and parcel. It's a fundamental way of viewing you and students. And since we know that grades can poison students' mental health by subjectively reducing their identity numbers and letters, one of the big tenets of ungrading, because it comes back to motivation, is how do I help students prize what they came in with? That, look, you are experts at things. And when I do my roster the first day, my question to them is, what are you an expert at? And I've had things like baking, riding a motorcycle, being a friend, being a sister, singing. Like, it's this beautiful thing where they realize I actually do have experiences and expertise. And it helps break down this idea that there's one expert in the room and there's a bunch of neophytes. So how do you develop assignments that help them prize what they already know and then build on that by challenging that perhaps? Okay, so nitty gritty. Here's some popular flavors of ungrading, how those tenets play out. I do what's called labor-based grading, which essentially comes down to this. Here's my grading in a nutshell. You are guaranteed a B if you do the essential labor of the class on time. So for instance, I allow for 3 late things, and then after that, a late thing would drop it to a B minus. C plus, each late thing. And I add in there extra labor. They're called extra labor bumps. If you need to get a higher grade, you can do things. And this is coming from a great voice in the field, Asao Inoue, Asao Inoue. And this is his idea about extra labor. We're a learning community. So whatever extra work you do, it should be for the community. I don't have them do extra papers or work for me. They do things like lead some of the exercises that my class does. They'll lead them for their peers. They'll give presentations on their revision. They might give a presentation on, I added this thanks to my amazing mentee who's not here to be this morning. But the teaching and writing program has a track where grad students follow us for semester. And this was her idea, Tara Hollander, her idea. The students have to do some act of community-facing rhetoric. I think in these times, what we're trying to do is get students to see, like, you are not voiceless. You are not powerless. There is a powerful impulse to feel that way in this dumpster fire of a time. And so do some act of community-facing rhetoric. It can be an op-ed, it can be going to a protest, a demonstration, whatever. And then they come back to class and they talk about the rhetorical background. Here's the sign that I wrote. Here's the colors I used. Here's why. Here's why I made these decisions in my op-ed. So it gets them doing work that other students can see that dovetails into the flow of the class. And they can do 3 of those. And so if they get everything in on time, except for like 3, they can have 3 things late. And they do 3 extra labor bumps, they can still get an A. They got that A with no subjective judgment of mine. I give 1.5 pages of feedback on average to every paper that comes in. There is no grade attached to it. It's simply feedback, qual feedback. The students read it as, oh, this is just what PT thought. It's not a defense of a grade. It's merely what PT thought about this paper. They can use that for their revision. And it takes that relationship to a different level. Because most of you, I'm guessing, you want to sit down with a student like equals and talk about stuff. The fun, hard stuff that you got into academia for. You don't want to sit there and sort of judge some other human and make them feel as awful as grades can. My feedback is the exact feedback I always gave. It points out what I think could be worked on. It can be critical in a way that I think is, I hope, encouraging and supportive. So they're not, quote unquote, just like turning whatever they want, just getting whatever they want on it. They're still getting everything. There's just no grade attached to it. And that's labor-based grading. A close cousin is what's called specs grading or specifications grading. And Linda Nilsson has a book called Specifications Grading, and it's kind of like the Bible of that flavor. Specs grading is a lot like labor-based grading. The difference tends to be there are very specific things that need to be met for, say, each assignment and or for the final grade. It uses something called bundling. So, for instance, let's say that I have a specifications class, and a lot of science classes work this way, or other classes can work this way. If you want a C, you have to do, 6 out of the 10 homeworks, and you have to do 8 out of the 12 whatevers. And if you want a B, you do a little bit more of each one. And an A, you do all of each one, and maybe things built in. So you bundle together. It's kind of like picking packages for like a cable station, right? Like, oh, I want 8 stations. I want 12 stations. I want 30 stations. The more stations you want, the more you have to pay. And so specs grading, like labor-based grading, involves saying, this is what I want you to do. Specifications grading might be even a little more intense in that sense, because most specifications say, here's the thing, if you don't meet this requirement on this paper, redo it until you get it. You can just keep revising. with the feedback. And some people limit the number of revisions, some people limit the timeline of revision, so you don't get swamped at the end. And this is the thing, again, there's no one system. And even within labor-based specs, portfolio, people have their own versions. It really is like, I found it to be this. In spring 2019, I went to a presentation here at AU with Asawa Noe, who was brought as part of anti-racist pedagogy. And it blew my mind. It truly blew my mind. And so I started to pull that thread of just grading. And as you keep pulling that, all of your pedagogy comes with it. You can't divorce assessment from pedagogy. They're part and parcel. And so when you get into any of these systems, you're going to find what feels authentic to you. And we might all move to ungrading, and they're going to be 19 different systems. That's just how it's going to go. Yeah.
Yes, because I do like a mastery based.
Yes.
Where I have an approaching mastery, you're almost there, you're just missing a critical. So that can be part of this. It doesn't have to be just you did it.
Absolutely. Right.
Okay.
And like, so do you allow revisions as they keep going? Penalty free?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's straight up ungrading. You're doing ungrading. That's great.
So what about, like, I'm thinking about my help, like my research methods course, and a lot of this I do, which is just like, I don't even give them anything, I give them feedback, and I'm like, you gotta redo it, right?
Right.
And they're really eager to do it. I usually do like video recordings too, if it's online, because they'll listen to that better. What about like the obsession around exams, right? Especially for like hard sciences too, like how would you do ungrading in that capacity?
So there's a great book called Ungrading, edited by Susan Bloom, B-O-U-M. And what's great about it is it's across disciplines. So it's an edited collection, all kinds of disciplines right in there. So I don't give exams, but I've read about the people that do. They tend to do things like this. Okay, here's the exam. Whatever you missed, there is some way for you to show that you've learned those missing things, and then you get those points right back. If the kid wants to, I mean, that's the other thing is, like a lot of the system, you might think that in my class, everyone gets A's, not by a long shot. I'd say 30% of kids are just like, I'll just take the B. Great. They can make that decision, right? Like I don't need to force a kid into something like it won't be authentic and it won't help them learning anyway. So a system like that, maybe a kid doesn't want to revise their test. Like, oh, I got a 78. Okay.
I mean, that's kind of what I do in my stats course, where I'll give them the exam and I'll give a half point if they give explanation of why they missed it. And usually it's just because they were debating between two.
Yeah.
Like they were almost there and then they're like, oh yeah, that's why it was. And to me, that seems more beneficial than being like, you gotta see what's in.
100%.
Just a version of like a 2-part exam that some people
Okay.
do, like they'll give a exam like on Friday. And then the students can come back on Monday and they have the exam again. So the things that they weren't sure about, they can look up, but it just gives you, it's like the exam correction kind of thing.
Cause I want the mastery. I don't care about, you know what I want them to know it.
I mean, like you put it perfectly. What do you want from your students? Do I want to rubber stamp them and evaluate them, or do I want them to learn? If it's the latter, then grades get in the way.
It's a little more of a kind of philosophical question, but I started teaching like 20 years ago, and I was only a little bit older than
Yeah.
my students. And I remember coming into the first class, I was TA, and I was like, we're all here to learn together. This is all about, I didn't do it as systematically and as well as you're explaining here, but it was like, this is all about the learning process. And they walked all over me. It was a horrible experience. And what I feel like what I learned from that is that students are coming to university already imprinted with this idea of a hierarchy. And as much as I hate it, I had to find sort of a balance between, say, asserting myself, like, yes, I am a knower, we are doing this, I'm guiding, but also I want you to learn. And I'm older now and I don't show up in the same way, but I just was wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
One is,
Yes, thank you.
you made me think of this amazing conversation I had. So Heather McDonald and I used to be office mates. She's a teacher. She doesn't anymore. And this is, this is my teaching outfit. I wear this every day. I don't like to think about what I'm going to wear, so this is it. I wear the red shoes because of Doctor Who and the red socks because of Phil Pullman, and I've got a whole batch of this. But we were sitting there and Heather said to me, I could never get away with it as a woman in academia. And I was like, holy shit. You know what I mean? Like, this was like 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Like, I'm still learning about like the amount of privilege that I walk in the classroom with. And I was like, absolutely, that's right. And so there's this interesting temptation, then I'll keep getting to that, but like, I was like, oh my God, well then should I like reverse course and not do a field recommendation? Should I start dressing more like stereotypically and professionally? But then I thought, but then aren't I just feeding into that mystique that this is what a professor looks like, a white guy in a coat with patches and like, And so I was like, shit, should I dress like I want? Should I dress like a way that women have to dress in academia? It's a very fraught thing. And so you were a TA, you were a young woman, and like, we can't ignore that was part of what was going on with students. Like, here's what I have found. Here's another story. Everything I do is I think on stories. The first semester I did Ungrading, and I'm still pretty meta as a teacher, but I was like super like, tell me what it was like. How did it go? What are you guys feeling? And so the first paper came in, and I was like, so like, what was it like writing in this environment? Because I have no frame of reference for it. And the student who sat in the back, I know people have heard the story, but she's like, I'll tell you PT because I go to PT. So I'll take the PT. I was like, great. She goes, so I started it last night. I was like, yeah, okay, of course. Fine, last minute. I'm not mad. She's like, I started last night and I sat there and I was like, all right, what does he want? And then I thought, these are her words, shit. It doesn't matter what he wants because he's not going to give me a grade based on it. So then she said, all right, well, shit, what do I do? And she said, I stared at the screen for 20 minutes. And then I realized, shit, I can do what I want. And then I wrote the paper. And I was like, I am never going to forget that story. That is exactly what the research says will happen. She says, and it made me wonder, what have I been doing my entire educational life? I've just been doing what teachers tell me to do. It's like she had this amazing moment from it. So the students who took advantage of me back then, I don't want to suggest that that's the common vibe because since fall 2019, I've been doing it. And I've got the solo research I can show you. Like, students begin to love us. Yes, there is some confusion at first, because it is unlike for a lot of students things that they've done. But when they finally grok that, look, the paper comes back, there's not a grade on it. There's just feedback. Like, he's serious. And like, when he talks to me in office hours, he's like curious about what I'm into. Like, they come along for the ride and they end up loving it. I've had so many more students retake my second class, my 100 and my 101 than ever before. Because they love the system. It's not because they're turning in crap work. They like doing the work of those classes. So I think it's a murky answer, I know.
And I'll just add, I think that sometimes Ungrading is taken as the whole course is now unstructured and unscaffolded, but even amid this approach that you're taking, your assignments are still reaching towards the goals. And I think that when we also think about the alignment and start to be more explicit with students about like when they don't succeed on a particular set of questions or exam. This is what learning that will connect to later conversations, like why it matters for you to redo that and get that right. Part of helping them to foster that curiosity and that spark to understand the purpose for particular tasks and concepts.
And I'll say it, and then I'll say it, but a little more in a second about this, but there is something so breath of fresh air like to your pedagogy when you make the switch, because you realize I don't have the whip anymore. I don't have grades to make them do stuff or make them do it well. So I need to rethink what I'm asking and how I'm talking about it. It is such a challenge to me as a teacher. But it's like the most exciting challenge. It's fun and it's invigorating. I'm constantly trying to revise my assignments and meet them where they are and hear from them. What was exciting? What did you kind of skimp on and why? You've got to plug in with, I can't use the cudgel, so it's got to be all carrots. How do I do that?
This may very well be what you're getting to with this next piece on portfolio of cooperative grades, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how this works, not in a typical class with a lot of assignments and things like that, but so I'm teaching a capstone class this fall, where it's a senior capstone. It's like they have a big project at the end. And where I can appreciate this idea a lot is like, how do I grade a podcast? You know what I mean? How do I grade a play? How do I grade, all of the creativity that students have to do this, which I love. But then there's this confusion of like, So I'm wondering where it's, where I struggle with the like labor-based component for some of these classes, it really is a big product at the end. And so I'm wondering if you have suggestions on how to apply this kind of framework to you guys.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind. Number one, ask them at the start of the semester what they think an A would look like. A lot of teachers that do Ungrading, let the students come up with their definition of success. And you don't have to like take it as first value, but you can have a conversation with them like, what would a great podcast, an A podcast look like to you? And why? And like, how do you get at that? And maybe part of it is studying books on podcasting, studying the scholarship on podcasts, and like teach them how to make, and this is something that I'm talking about this semester with my students, teach them how to make their own judgments. So one way is let them come up with the rubrics. I don't like rubrics, but I mean this in a loose sense, like the idea of what it goes, and then follow that. And you might have then, how many students are in that class?
30.
You might have 30 different rubrics, right? But you will hopefully have reached them with the students, and they're going to be authentically plugged into it, and they're going to take their learning seriously because you gave them ownership of it. So that's one that you could do with it. The other is this idea of it's one big project. That's a huge thing about AI that we can talk about in a minute. Ungrading and good pedagogy in general is about process, right?
It'll be very scaffolded.
Exactly. And so the scaffold is what gets evaluated. Did you do it on time?
Right.
And that can be how you kind of build up to it. And so the final product is not quote unquote, like I teach a Lit 107 creative writing class, and my God, I was so happy to go to Ungrading in that. Imagine you have to give up someone's poem a B or a C. What? Like that's awful to consider. But now I don't have to. And so if someone's creative work, you don't have to anymore be like, this is my subjective judgment of your creative merit. But instead, these were the milestones, the micro deadlines they talk about in Bain's book. Here are the micro deadlines that you set. Did you meet them? Great. You built up to it. Now, do you want to make that a quote unquote A? Do you want to make that a B with extra labor? That's where labor-based grading work. Let you have some wiggle room. Do those help?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing I'll say about the portfolio, which is it Jesse Stommel in Ungrading points out, whoever talks about portfolio grading, is it Jesse Stommel? One of the things that he noticed is that his female students always gave themselves lower grades than he thought they should have gotten, which is why the cooperative grading were like, women would come in, they'd be like, yeah, it wasn't that great. And the men, of course, were like, oh, I'm an A. Because that's what we do. And so yeah, he's like, more often he had to raise students' grade when they would come for conversations. But just imagine what that would be like. A student comes to you and they have to not necessarily like justify in an antagonistic way, but they would say like, here's what I think my portfolio represents and why. You can have a conversation with them. They'll never forget that conversation. They won't forget the grade that you slap on a project that seems to them very unthinking. So those are some big flavors. With my eye on clocks, we've covered some questions. Anything comes up, keep letting me know. Oh yeah. So.
With writing, how are you dealing with AI and like making sure they're not just like using AI? I mean, I know creative writing a little bit different, but like I'm just so curious to know what you all are doing because I've been hearing the blue book argument and that to me gets into accommodations, and now you're going to be able to tell who has accommodations if they're using a computer, and that feels icky. Like I'm not. Yeah, curious.
It is going to be an unsatisfying answer because the answer is everyone's technical to me. Like Kelly, I know, for instance, right for you, is going to have people do a lot of handwriting. My old mentor, who's getting her first graduate class as a TA, is going to do a lot of handwriting. And so this is actually a beautiful segue because this is exactly what we're going to talk about. How do we navigate that? And the first takeaway you're going to see is this Catherine Savini piece has been making its rounds. You all may have read this already. We can't ban ad, but we can friction fix it by Savini. It was in Inside Higher Ed just a few weeks ago. And it made the circles of ones that I travel on. But, this is true. Across writing the curriculum and writing center coordinator, as the writing across curriculum and writing center coordinator on campus, faculty asked me how to detect their students' use of generative AI and how to prevent it. My response to both questions is we can't. We can't detect it. We can't necessarily prevent it. So what am I here to try and sell you? A couple ideas from Savini and then from another piece, and then I have some thoughts that might be useful. Her idea is what she calls friction fixing. And it comes from these two researchers, Rayo and Sutton. And essentially it boils down to friction fixing means make the right things easier and the wrong things harder. So if the right thing is doing the work on your own and the wrong thing is sending it off to AI to do, how can that come about? So on the left are her ways to decrease friction, how to make the good things easier for students to do. And this goes back to breaking projects down. So you can see like there's so much overlap. And this is why I'm really excited by AI and Ungrading talking to each other, because I think Ungrading is ready for this moment. Break the projects down, give them deadlines, give them conferences, give them feedback, places where they're gonna have to come talk to you about their work. Again, let me preface it by saying that again, this is not going to be a cure-all that's going to work 100%. I know that, but these are some best practices that I found out that might be useful. Let them start working in class so you can be there, so you can be over their shoulder. They have questions about finding a source or evaluating it. You can be there. Very often, I've done this too, we give students assignments and then we're like, I assume that's what you'll do outside of class. Let me know how it goes. If you have questions, drop by office hours. But not every student knows about office hours, how to do them. A lot of first generation students are very unfamiliar with the idea of dropping by across the office. And so a lot of people are going to fall through the cracks. Be in class with them. That's one way to help. How do you design your element? How do you talk your assignment? How do you talk about it? Is it punitive? Is it the scary thing? Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. You must do this, you must do this. As opposed to the welcoming, invite them to it. Savini talks about assignment design as an invitation to do something. What do they have the chance to do on this assignment, right? And why does it matter? What's their motivation for it? She says, quote, we can invite students to write for real world audiences and wrestle with John C. Beans calls beautiful problems. This is what about the excitement of ungrading. I can't use grades to get them to do work anymore. So I need to find things that they believe in. So as a quick story, thanks to Tara's idea about the community facing rhetoric, extra labor. We had a student, I teach a class on Ta-Nehisi Coates. So it's very much race in America and social activism and things like that. And she did her presentation on the Abrego Garcia case. And she is from an immigrant community. And she, half the time, was on the verge of tears, trying to communicate how dangerous this was to her family and her loved ones and her friends. And everyone in that class, we were moved, many of us, to tears ourselves. She didn't AI that. Her slides, were they imperfect? Were there misspellings? Absolutely. Was it one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen? Absolutely. She cared about that project. It was meaningful to her. And I was saying this to my mentee just the other day. I know that that's an impossible high bar to get every student to feel that way, but that's my bar. That's where I want my assignments to shoot for. How can I make them care so much about what they're doing that they don't want to punt it to AI? That's a challenge. I know that I can hear, I'm like, well, that's not impossible. That's the challenge of where we are. So let's find beautiful problems that they care about. We cannot assign them a beautiful problem that is not their community's, their personhood's beautiful problem. Let's give them ways to find that. How can we make the hard things or the wrong things, quote unquote, harder? Craft projects that less easily rely on generative AI. So she gives, for example, electronic zines, right? With images and graphics that are built into it. Have class discussions where the student, they have to know their stuff right there. Right. And if they don't, they're going to feel it. And I don't want to use like public shame. It's the former Catholic in me, but like there's a little something like I want to do well in front of my peers. And so class discussions can be good ways to help. Again, presentations can help. Yes, they can punt presentations AI. But if you have a Q&A built in from the students, from yourself, that can help. That's the interactive element idea there. You can also, and this has done some mileage with students that I've had, talk about the limitations and the costs of AI, especially like water usage, power usage. My Coates students were very surprised. We started talking about AI, and you know, one of the great things about that class is far fewer white-dominated students than our classes. People are drawn to the Coates class of different communities. And I was like, how many of you want to sound like a middle-aged white guy? Because that's what generative AI pulls from. It pulls from published stuff. Who gets published the most? Guys that look like this. And so it turns out this bland vanilla prose. And they were like, oh, damn. Because you should want to sound like a middle-aged bland white guy. And so that did some work here at AU. And then very important, get to know your students. Getting to know them means that they care about what you think of their work, not because of the grade, but because you know that you're kind of like not friends, but you are acquaintances that care. I mean, I talk about love for my students. I've got this brilliant love in my syllabus I can show you, but they want to do well for you, if nothing else. I'd rather have them do well for themselves, but if we're talking about how to make the wrong things harder, they might feel bad about punting to AI and instead be willing to turn in more crappy, unpolished work, but they'll know that I'll know it's theirs and that matters to me because I'm going to have these conversations with my students so that they hear all of this. And you also have to have a sincere investment in them. If you don't like students, if you don't trust them, all of this is useless to you. Like, I won't be able to get you to move to anything if you don't trust students, frankly, if you don't like them, frankly. Yeah.
These conversations about AI and their concerns, what they love and what they don't love, it has been so helpful. I mean, I had one student say, "Oh, I just feel like it's making me stupid."
Yes.
And that really resonated with other students who were like, "Yeah, I kind of feel like that way too." And then also the sustainability piece. I mean, that has been, and maybe it's unique to this generation, AU students, but it is something students bring up all the time. I don't want to contribute to that.
My colleague in WSP, Chuck Cox, he wants to bring in a crate of water and show them every query that you do, this much water gets used. That's a nice dramatic way to do it. Oh yeah, I was just gonna say this. For my AI day, because I just finished my 100 syllabus yesterday, I'm pairing two readings on that day. The first is the relatively famous one that many of us read in higher ed, where the student, it's called we're using ChatGPT way more than you think we are. When it's by a student about it's like from 2023. And then I'm pairing that reading with the new MIT study that came out about how it's literally making you less smart. You are thinking more shallow. You are not transferring learning. And that's going to kind of inform our conversation that day. Okay. So this is Savini dovetailing to ungrading. She says, we can get to know our students by canceling class to hold short one-on-one or small group conferences. If we have strong relationships with students, then this is a link out to research, they're less likely to cheat intentionally. We can build these bonds by sharing a video about ourselves, writing introductory letters, sharing relevant experiences linked to research and failures, writing conversational feedback on student writing, and using alternative grading approaches. Right? So I'm not coming out of nowhere on this. Megan O'Rourke had a big piece in the New York Times back on the 18th, which was, again, shared by many people that I know. She says, the context here is that higher education, as it's currently structured, can appear to prize product over process. This goes back to the idea of the big final project. Our students are caught in a relentless arms race of jockeying for the next resume item. And that to me was like AU in a nutshell. I've got to get an internship. I've got to get this other thing. Time to read deeply or write reflectively is scarce. Where the gentleman C suffice, now my students can use AI to secure the technocrat's A. Many are going to take that option, especially if they believe that in the jobs they're headed for, AI will write the memos anyway. And I know that there are places on campus where that is the rule, that AI has to write a memo, what I've heard. So they're not wrong. They're not wrong. She says, this is Megan O'Rourke's advice, and you'll see that it comes back to, in some part, ungrading. The conscientious path forward is to create educational structures that minimize the temptation to outsource thinking. Perhaps we should consider getting rid of letter grades in writing classes, or all classes, which could be pass-fail. That would be my dream. The age of the take-home essay as a tool for assessing mastery and comprehension is over. And that's something that in WSP, we are beginning to wrestle with. What does that mean? Seminars might now include more in-class close reading or weekly in-person writing labs, during which students can write without access to AI. Starting this fall, professors must be clear about what kinds of uses we allow and aware of all the ways AI insinuates itself as a collaborator when a student opens the ChatGPT window. So my final bit here is doing some big connecting the dots, challenges and opportunities. Why do they use AI? It's an important question for us to think about. This was a study that came out it was conducted in 2023, teen and young adult perspectives on generative AI patterns. I believe that always we need to be talking to students, working with students, making them part of our work of writing a curriculum, of writing objectives. Like they need to have a hand in their education if we want them to care about it. The number one reason that students say they used it, was to get information. They're using it like Google. It's not correct at all. It hallucinates all the things that we know. They don't. That's the thing. That we've got a real big opportunity to meet that challenge. That it has become for them like, just go ask ChatGPT for this knowledge. Like we go to Google and do that. That's the number one reason. Number two is help with schoolwork, and that's where we can come. Oh no, sorry. Number two is brainstorm ideas. They'll sit there and they'll put in like, give me some possible directions to take this prompt. And then they'll follow it, right? They've outsourced that really important thinking. That's the kind of outsourcing that breaks my heart, I have to say. So knowing these things, why are the majority of them using generative AI for finding info? I think because it's easy and they don't know better routes. And so one of the questions for us is, how do we fit into helping them with that idea? The other thing is they use it for schoolwork. Why? I came up with some reasons, which I'd love to hear you all sort of see if I missed things. Number one, they use AI if they don't care about it. That makes sense. So what can we do about it? What we've been talking about. We need authentic assignments that meet students where they are, and we need to demonstrate why it matters. We can't just assume that they get the value of an essay or a lab report or any kind of exercise. Be explicit. Be clear about why you're doing what you're doing. So that's one thing. What if they care about it, but they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing and or they're overwhelmed at the moment? All right, well, this is where the ungraded process assignments can help. They can walk with us as much as we need to be there with them through the learning steps. And again, that with us might be fraught. You need to walk with, what's my ultimate outcome? Do I want them to learn? Sometimes they're going to learn when they're on their own and fail. Great. Some things they need to learn with a guide next to them, helping them navigate those tricky shoals. And so meet them, work with them more, foster relationships, which means sincere engagement, which means caring about their outcomes, and not poisoning it with grading. This is the thing. We tend to, many of us, I used to think that I had great relationships with every student. I was just that kind of guy, so gregarious, so caring, so empathetic, all my students loved me. And then a student I would give a C- in our paper. And they would come in angry as all hell. And the facade that I thought was our relationship was gone. It's not it's not a peer relationship. It is an authority figure to someone who feels they've been wronged by the authority and they are pissed. This might argue probably fairly. And so that relationship was not what I thought. How does grading color your relationship with students? And do you care about that? Those are two questions I'd ask them. How does it color and do you care if it does or not? Getting a sincere relationship with them is going to help them feel that when they have questions, they can come to you. All right, so maybe they care about it, but they go to AI because they need a good grade. They have a scholarship, they have a place in university, they're on probation, whatever. And so they know that, yeah, if I try something and I fail, I'm cooked. I need to go to the thing that's going to give me a safe paper. So what do we have to do there? We need to have assessment methods that never feel punitive to a student. We also need to lobby to change policies that glorify this troubled tool called grading. Policies like unforgiving GPA requirements for scholarships. I think there's work bigger than our own classes that if you get in on grading, you can become voices at. In what ways is it poisoning the systems around us? What are the small changes that we can lobby for that will have big effects down the road? And then finally, I came up with, okay, they care about it, but they have no idea what's allowed and what's not allowed. And this is coming from Allison Thomas, who's doing the of academic integrity, was telling me, she had a student that was brought before the panel for plagiarism because they used AI. The student literally had no idea that it wasn't okay. They just, and somewhere along the path of education, they just had never actually been taught. That's not how you go about finding info. You just pop it in there, and if you're like, that can't be right, that kid's trying to get by with something. This is the tension between ungrading and the other side of it. Trust the kid that the kid was led astray. What is the best thing that we can do for the students that use AI because they didn't know they couldn't, or they didn't know how to use it ethically? And this is where I say, number 4, we need as an institution to wrestle with the multiple messages students are getting from our colleagues. The next classroom, the next department. we need to know that there is not a unified message across campus, across the classroom, down the hallway. You need to be explicit about what we'll allow and why. Tell them if you're going to allow any kind of AI, tell them what and why. If you're going to limit it, tell them why. Let them understand the decision making. And then whenever possible, we collectively need to think of every moment as a teaching moment and work to have our institution do the same. That's what I'm talking about, like the students who are brought up on plagiarism for using AI. Let's use that first offense as a real teaching moment. How do we lessen the punitive side and boost the teaching side, the pedagogical side? That was 5 minutes over. I'm sorry to say, but that was really exciting. I can hang out and chat more, but I think
Just if I can, your last
Yeah.
points about AFW and et cetera, you have your undergrad dean and correct, right? So, like, hello.
I
We need to go run a session right now. But
is there undergrad dean? Is there anything that I've talked about that you're like, no, that's going to get him fired?
no.
See, so
But there are some things we can't control because of like VA, Department of Ed, like all.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
are some.
yeah, this is all about being boxed in by a bad system and not joining it. That's what I think ungrading comes down to. That was a dismal ending. It's just floating poison, everybody. Don't drink it. But thank you all for that. And again, I can talk now. I can talk if you want to find me on campus ever. Just send me an email. I love this stuff. And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
I think I'm gonna send you a message and ask for some of your guidelines, because I think I'd be use it for calendar semester.
Sure. Like my actual like attendance policy and stuff like that, or
Yeah, just the.
Yeah.
Because I use it when I've taught grad student for classes for STEM, PhD students on how to be professors. I use it a lot of time,
Yeah.
but I've not done last time.
Yeah, exactly.
whatever I can do to help.
Somebody else is like.
Sure.
I think the best thing
I think
is
Yeah.
the systems uses.
But you should schedule them first.
Yeah,
And
most of the time in IT's first year is entirely ungraded.
Yeah.
Like, and it has been for ages.
And isn't Brown also doing something?
Brown doesn't do.
Yeah.
And they have like they allow pass fail. They do, but they allow pass fail on kind of everything.
Nice.
I went to the student panel, they had it this spring, it was really interesting.
It just allows students to take scriptural risks. Because then they're not like, oh, I can't get to med school because I'm gonna get into this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've literally had a kid that told me about how he came to office hours. We talked about his idea for a paper. I was like, I don't think I'd be able to pull that off. Frankly, like here's all the things but if you want to go for it, he's like, I don't know, maybe I'll play it safe. We'll see. So then he went for it, and of course it was like fraught with fallacies and problems. And I explained everything that went wrong. And at the end of the class, he told the class, he's like, PT gave me this heads up. I thought, why not? I'll go for it. It can't hurt me. And I learned more from all that I did wrong than any paper I've ever done. And I was like, I'm going to use that story forever too, man. That's true.